for all our merchants. 2019, we went on to launch UPI. Razorpay, 2017, we went on to launch UPI, Razorpay 2.0, launch of eNACH, Aadhaar-based payments. We ventured into capital in 2020. Interestingly, we've also had a bunch of acquisitions. We had two acquisitions. One is a company called Opfin, which is around some of our early settlements and salary-based fund transfers. And this other is ThirdWatch. ThirdWatch is largely around cash on delivery risk. We've also started payments for freelancers, neobanking for current accounts and commercial cards. A lot of product innovation, a lot of business growth, a lot of interesting things that have been happening in the last few years, very specifically in the Indian ecosystem and more specifically, in the Razorpay's context. So this is a bit of a brief of journey in terms of where we've sort of arrived at. So some disclaimers for the stock. Okay, so there's an antithesis disclaimer. Rule number one, don't build your observability stack unless you really need to do so. Like seriously, I mean, I really mean this. And this I can talk from experience and the pain of building some of these systems. So do not build it if you really don't have a need so, right? We have some reasonable inexpensive options. Again, the definition of inexpensive varies at what scale and what growth of the company you're in. APM plus others for first trying and learning things. So don't build it. You might want to leverage something that already exists, which is reasonably inexpensive. Rule number three, your journey, for example, right, when you start off an application or a service or a company or a set of services, for example, would probably look like this. You'd first want to structure your logs. And I truly mean by having structured logs because at the end of the day, there's a lot of log data that you're going to actually see over a period of time. If you don't formulate a decent structure for your logs, you're going to be probably in trouble because you're not going to be able to relive anything useful. It's literally like searching for a needle in a haystack, right? And which means that the right way to do this is you probably want to have structured logs, build whatever dashboards that you want to sort of build on top of it, and then drill down with the query parameters that you specifically want to do. And you cannot issue query parameters if you do not have a certain structure, right? Garbage in, garbage out, standard principle, right? The second is, for example, you would want to actually focus on metrics. And these days, Prometheus / Grafana seems to be sort of the most emerging common format of actually being able to define metrics across your application. This should largely handle a lot of use cases for you, right? I mean, what I mean by that is that if you want to, for example, have a collection of applications, you emit your Prometheus metrics, and then you build a reasonably good Grafana dashboards on top of it. That in combination, for example, with logs, and of course, maybe additional tooling like Sentry, et cetera, should largely sort of solve this particular problem for you in terms of, measuring or ensuring your application's uptime, availability, and all of those things. Now, tracing, I think, like what someone mentioned, right? You only attempt when you have a reasonable number of microservices. And I don't want to harp on this term microservices. I would largely call it as interconnected services in some sense. I mean, the term microservices means different things to different people. So in essence, you basically want to only look at tracing when so why are you looking at tracing, right? So like we spoke, you're only talking about tracing when there are when you're talking about network boundaries. You don't otherwise have to talk about tracing. I mean, otherwise tracing is as good as basically doing a start timer, write code, end timer, and do a diff and put it out, right? It doesn't make sense otherwise. Now, the moment you probably, I mean, this is a vague number. I mean, there is no lot of math and science around this, but this is observational largely. The moment you're probably crossing about 30 plus services or probably in our case, like 200 plus engineers, you probably start looking at the total cost of ownership for building an observability platform versus what exists. And what I mean by that is that if you're probably having a large number of services and or a large engineering team to deal with, then visibility and deeper insights into your systems and applications becomes fairly complex to answer. And some of these tools may or may not answer all of those questions. Even then, if you probably want to, for example, for example, live with some of the existing platforms, paid or otherwise, you may want to do that because there is a lot of cost to own when you're building your observability platform. There is infrastructure cost, infrastructure, especially cloud platforms. And I think most of us today are on cloud platforms. You're not on-prem data centers largely, I'm presuming, right? So you have a lot of infrastructure cost. Your cloud vendor charges you a lot of money for a lot of different things. And we'll actually come to some of those costs that actually bit us when we were building these systems. There is development cost because you have to put in tooling on top of it. and there is people cost, which is sometimes largely forgotten. Engineering salaries aren't cheap. You have an infrastructure team, you have a platform team, or you have something on that lines to actually maintain some of these systems, right? You're building some of these things, you also need to maintain it, because it's not just build and throw. You have to keep doing it. And then once you're coming to this particular juncture saying that, yes, I sort of really have a need to build it because my existing tools are either inflexible, or they don't meet the demands, or they are or they are too costly, or whatever it is. Then you go into the cycle of scale, tune, repeat, which means you have to scale things, you have to tune things. Again, this whole cycle repeats. Rule number 6, if you still have doubts, go back to rule number 1, and start this journey all over again, right? So that's the antithesis for you. So don't build it unless you really have a need to build it. We had reached a point where we had to build it, and we'll go through why we reached the point where we had to build it, right? So before we sort of jump into that, we sort of want to take a quick detour into what our tech stack looks like, because it's sort of important to understand why this journey, or these platforms or tooling was sort of necessary, right? So 2015, fairly simple stuff. We had one single payments monolithic application, which was written in PHP, Laravel stack. So we had a couple of external things. Yeah, checkout, dashboard. Checkout is basically our checkout application. We had a dashboard. A dashboard is basically operational dashboard plus merchant dashboards. And then you had your merchant servers, which are sort of doing direct SQL calls with our applications. And then you had these on the right hand side. You basically had these banks and gateways. We have RDS, which is MySQL, and Redis. This is probably on the right hand side is what the numbers you sort of look like. These are approximate numbers. At that particular point of time, for logging, we were sort of looking at Splunk. We slowly started overshooting the numbers on Splunk, and Splunk sort of became expensive, right? So then what we did was, somewhere in 2017, I'm sort of giving you across 3 different say generations of sorts. Somewhere in 2017, you still had this monolithic application, but we slowly started venturing it out into a collection of microservices. So we had, and also at that particular point of time, we started, for example, rewriting some of these microservices that we were building, or re-architecting some of these microservices that we were building in Golang. We had a dabble between Java versus Go. We picked Go for certain reasons intrinsic to us. So again, you had the same set of external integration entities which exist. And also what we did was we started basically formulating our data engineering pipeline. This was a simple ETL pipeline that actually moved all the way into Elasticsearch, for all visualizations and all sorts of this thing. This was sort of our first version of our data platform plus observability platform of sorts in some sense, right? So this was, again, roughly on what you see on the right hand side is roughly what is the kind of scale numbers we sort of hit. Again, this was still 20 GB. This was still partly in Splunk and partly getting to move into a homegrown Elasticsearch service, which again went on, and we sort of rewrote a lot of things into a homegrown Elasticsearch service for about a year. And in 2019, this is pretty much how it looked like, right? And this is also sort of not complete. There are quite a few other services that you sort of missed out. This is largely representative. Our database stack grew, our application stack grew, our data pipeline stack grew, pretty much everything grew. And I think I had the number somewhere, but maybe I just missed it. So, but roughly to give you sort of a sense, this is sort of somewhere in the middle of July, some of the numbers that we sort of drew out, right? And as we speak, for example, there is IPL that is going on. This is going to be a holiday season where a bunch of other merchants are going to come up and put up e-commerce sales and a whole lot of other things, right? This is sort of the number that we were sort of looking at right in the middle of the pandemic, and which at which particular point of time, businesses across the world are not in the finest state, so to speak. Right now, with this in place, okay, what exists from an observability standpoint, right? So what changed actually for us was basically we moved into Kubernetes, production grade Kubernetes in 2017. Again, Joy was again part of the journey there, right? We were probably one of the earliest adopters of Kubernetes in the country, and we were at that particular point of time, EKS and bunch of these things did not really exist. So we had to build a homegrown solution with our then our DevOps lead and a bunch of us. So our evolution for engineering and business growth and services. So we were doing roughly close to about a 500% month-on-month growth, which was quite staggering. Operational cost and overall cost, logging monitoring needs, we started growing. Infrastructure costs kept growing. So roughly by 2019, we had sort of moved into Sumo Logic, because we realized that, ELK, perhaps we didn't have the right apparatus, and I would say the bandwidth, the engineering constraints, the engineering liberties to sort of build out and manage Elasticsearch. So we sort of outsourced all of our logging to Sumo Logic, and that became very, very expensive. That continues to still be expensive. So we are doing roughly about 2 terabytes of logs a day, only for applications. We then moved our infrastructure logs to Elasticsearch. Application log sort of continues to be in Sumo Logic. We changed our core language stack. We moved to Golang, and there was also a lot of additional tooling. So suddenly you introduce a new language. People want frameworks. People want, for example, one-click way by which the application generates in one shot, with all the tooling possible, whether it's to do with logging, whether it's to do with Sentry, whether it's to do with a web framework, whether it's to do with a ORM layer, whether it's to do with a Redis or a cache adapter, or all sorts of things, or a Kafka adapter, or an SQS adapter, or all sorts of things, right? So now that also meant that we had to actually build additional tooling to support, for example, the evolution of these services, right? Our overall architecture, we are, for the last maybe a year and a half, we've been trying to break down a monolith. In addition, for example, we have introduced Kong as an API gateway. And how do you sort of handle east-west communication? And what I mean by east-west communication is, how do two services, for example, in a single cluster, in a single Kubernetes cluster, or across Kubernetes clusters talk, right? You sort of do not want to go outward, inward all the time as much as possible. There are implications in terms of security. There are implications in terms of NAT gateway costs. There are a lot of other implications that sort of come along the way, right? And also alongside, our outbound footprint started increasing. We had more external parties to talk to, more gateways to talk to, a lot more emails, SMSs, webhooks that started actually growing in leaps and bounds, right? So this is probably what has changed, for example, in the last 5 years in terms of our tech stack, or data needs, or infrastructure needs, or a bunch of other things, right? And what did we have to actually address some of these things? So there was New Relic. This was introduced sometime in 2017. Surprisingly, I don't know if for many of these areas where Joy was actually involved, I don't know why. I have to unfortunately take his name, but surprisingly, in many of these areas, yeah. So
this is the reason I'm organizing this meetup. That's my lineage.
Right, yeah. So sometime in 2017, we sort of introduced New Relic again. We introduced APM because well, heck, we needed an insurance, right? We needed to know what the heck was going on. If something goes wrong, we need to go and look back at some place to say, acha, this is where really the problem is, right? We had at that particular point of time, we had actually built up quite extensively Prometheus and Grafana. We moved, for example, into Prometheus HA pairs. For those of you who don't know, Prometheus is not inherently highly available, which basically means that if you need to, for example, work with Prometheus, you have a concept called as a HA pair, which basically means two Prometheus or multiple Prometheus instances talk to each other. Now, when multiple Prometheus instances talk to each other, your query, your Grafana cannot federate your requests across a number of Prometheus instances, right? So you sort of need some sort of a federation layer, and that is where this tool called Thanos sort of comes in place. So what Thanos does is that Thanos sort of aggregates. I didn't put a diagram, but for those of you who are curious, you can probably go and there's a lot of open documentation on Thanos. So what Thanos tries to do is it sort of aggregates, for example, multiple Prometheus data stores, and it sort of stores it in some place, and that some place could be an EBS volume, it could be an S3 bucket, it could be a variety of other things. So obviously EBS becomes expensive, so you would want, for long-term retention, you would want to store it on something like S3. And all that Grafana does is that instead of contacting these n number of Prometheus systems, Grafana only has one single interface to Thanos, and Thanos' responsibility is to somehow figure out, how to sort of generate those metrics for Grafana to visualize, right? Our Kubernetes cluster, we had to split between a CDE, which we call as a card data environment, and a non-card data environment. And again, each of these environments will have should have ideally a blue-green model, which means roughly we had about 4 Kubernetes clusters in production. Logging, like I said, we moved from Splunk to EFK to Sumo Logic. We also we have an interesting blog post in terms of our event pipeline. We also have been working on an event pipeline, and the reason why we had to, and this was all pre by the way, pre-APM, pre-tracing world. So the reason why we wanted an eventing pipeline is like someone mentioned, right? So what happens for my front-end application? So we have a large footprint on our front-end applications, which is our checkout applications and our mobile SDKs. How do I, for example, generate synthetic metrics from these places, right? You cannot obviously expose, tracing to them. You cannot obviously expose a Kafka queue to, your mobile SDKs. It's not possible, right? So we started having this middleware layer. This middleware layer sort of receives all of these things. It converts all of these data into, schematic event data, and the event data was sort of getting pumped into a data lake of sorts. So roughly we were doing about 1 billion events a day. And now with all of these things, we still needed to, for example, handle a bunch of things, right? So how do you sort of, for example, look at slow query logs, right? My database is sort of misbehaving. How do I, for example, identify places in my application which are intrinsically slow? Yes, New Relic did give us some insight, but it was not largely useful for certain reasons I'll mention below. Then you sort of also have to work with something like a Percona monitoring tool, because then you would really want to get a lot of insights. RDS inherently, and Amazon for that matter, inherently doesn't give a lot of metrics around MySQL, so or Postgres for that matter, right? The CloudWatch metrics is the only source of truth that you have. So we had to introduce additional tooling like PMM. Then within our applications, inherently because of Laravel inherently doesn't support connection pooling. So we introduced connection pooling layers. We had to introduce circuit breaking. Whole lot of other re-architectural changes also started happening in different application layers, right? Now the problem was New Relic wasn't actually helpful. The moment we moved into Golang and we started using Golang, New Relic actually wasn't helpful because of the fact that New Relic agents, for example, work very, very well when you have a virtual machine. In terms of PHP, you have a nice Apache or an Nginx agent that can sort of intercept, for example, all of the requests that go from your application to your database or application to elsewhere, and it can nicely sort of bring out those things. Java works wonderful, Python works wonderful. The moment I'm basically going into Go, there is no virtual machine, right? Because at the end of the day, my application is nothing more than a binary, right? So what it means is that some of the free instrumentation that you get, actually for many applications, it is just saying that, you start the New Relic agent and then you put a middleware, a HTTP middleware if it's a web application, right? And it sort of works. But unfortunately in Go, unfortunately in Go, if you had, for example, 100 different HTTP controllers, each of those controllers needs to be instrumented. Not only that, your database needs to be instrumented, your HTTP calls needs to be instrumented. And unless and until you sort of do that, nothing was really free on the New Relic side. One. Second, if we really have to do some of those things, right? Our largest question was, why should I then stick to a vendor like New Relic? Because inherently, New Relic is not giving me a lot of other options, to do some of this free instrumentation. I, as an engineer, I'm expected to, for example, instrument my application and then tie in all of these things to New Relic. And they're only charging me at that particular point of time for the collection and the visualization part of it, which seems very, very expensive. And we'll come to why it is also expensive, right? Now, Prometheus and Grafana, the challenge was that, yes, once we investigated and sort of, introduced Thanos and Prometheus HA pairs, we thought it was working fine till Thanos, for example, started having a bottleneck. So Thanos, like I said, right? So because of the fact that it stores in S3, unfortunately, Thanos's format in S3 doesn't obey partitions. And what I mean by partitions here is, for example, I have metrics for today. I would ideally like to, in my S3 bucket, I'd ideally like to create one particular directory, which is 2020, 26, 09, or something like that, right? So what Thanos inherently does is that it basically takes all of these metrics, it puts it in a local store. Every 2 hours or 6 hours, which is a configurable parameter, it pushes all of these metrics into S3. Now, when it pushes all of these metrics into S3, it's a flat structure in S3, which basically means that standard analytical information requires partitionable data, right? Because I'm literally going to say in Grafana saying that, hey, show me the metrics from time T1 to time T2. And when I clearly know T1 and T2 are my surface boundaries, are my metric boundaries, I can ideally go ahead and, standard do a partition-based query in my underlying file system and retrieve that data. Unfortunately, unfortunately, Thanos doesn't do that. Thanos, in fact, maintains its own metric, metadata layer from where it is able to identify some of these things, but that indexing there was inherently problematic. And so what actually started happening was when I'm actually going ahead and saying that they show me data for any time more than 6 hours or 8 hours, Grafana used to just break. I mean, it used to become non-responsive because Thanos were not reasonably non-responsive, right? So yeah, so that was one particular part of the problem. The other part of the problem was also because of the service growth and service expansion, a metrics ingestion grew to a few million units, and we'll come to this particular number, exact number, in a while, right? That also started growing, and there is no way that's going to reduce. We are going to introduce only more services. We're only going to grow more in numbers and scale. So there is no way where that number is also going to come down, right? So clearly, this was again not working very well in our favor, right? Now, the moment also we sort of split our Kubernetes clusters, the questions that came in was, hey, how do I, for example, understand inter-service failures? More specifically, for example, how do I understand that a Kubernetes cluster actually failed, or a particular availability zone has failed, or a particular node has failed? Bunch of those kind of questions also came along the way, right? Logging, again, like I said, we increased to 2 terabytes. How do you make sense of this data, right? Now, specifically, for example, in the event pipeline, even though we had a lot of structure baked in into the as part of the event pipeline, funnel analysis was getting complex. And when I say funnel analysis, what I mean is that if you look at, for example, a simple payment state machine, right? You have, let's say, like a payment created to, for example, a payment authorized, to payment success, to a payment capture, to a payment refund, or whatever, right? There's a finite state, not really a finite, but there's a state machine associated to it in some sense, right? Now, I would want to, for example, know at different points what has been the drop off. Say, for example, I want to know how many users were there at the time when the payment create was done, or how many users dropped off till authorization happened, or how many users dropped off till capture happened, or how many users, for example, retried some of these transactions, etc., 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 right? And yes, we didn't have distributed tracing. We were quite late to the party. This was as recent as 2019, right? So there were these very complex, problems that sort of happened. Good problems, but good, interesting scale problems. But pretty much all of these were sort of, screaming for attention in some sense, if I have to sort of put it right. Additionally, business, and when I say business, it's a combination of business and product. They came back with a lot of other things, right? So, so our current business and engineering metrics is sort of scattered, right? So what I mean by scattered is your Prometheus. Like I said, a lot of data goes into data lake. So then people invested in building BA tools on top of the data lake. You had logs on one side, you had New Relic on the other side, then you had Sentry on the other side, right? Also, a lot of our alerting, whether it is to do with Sumo Logic based alerting, or whether it is to do with Grafana based alerting, all of them are basically based on alert rules, and alert rules are inherently what we call as known knowns. That is, I say, for example, that, hey, notify me when my payment success rate dips by X%. Notify me when CPU increases by X%. Notify me when memory increases by Y%, right? This is what I know of the system. Now, today, the problem with the known knowns is that today I can say that show me when my payment success rate dips by, let's say, 5%. But tomorrow, I would want to, for example, keep it to 2%, right? My business could change. My application behavior could change. That's one. The second part of the problem is that this 2% or 5%, I have to tune it for different kinds of gateways, because each kind of, in our world, each kind of a payment gateway could give us different kind of success criterion. So I cannot have a uniform 5% rule or a 10% rule across all the gateways, and not just the gateways, any other external integration, any other service, inter-services itself. I could have one service which is written in Golang, but I could have some machine learning library, and which we do, certain machine learning library that exists, for example, in Python, right? Obviously, if a Golang application is talking to a Python application, or for that matter, a Golang application is talking to a Laravel application, my Golang application could, for example, get me back a response in about maybe 10 milliseconds or 20 milliseconds, right? But it may not be the case, for example, with my Laravel application or my Python application, because of the complexity and the behavior. Or for that matter, two applications, they do not necessarily operate at the same scale because of the inherent business complexity in them, right? So, which means, how do you sort of, for example, set rules in about 30, 40, 50 services, in terms of, what should be the right SLAs, right? And who decides that, that. So the problem with that means that all of the alerting that we do today, or all of the monitoring that we do today, is inherently reactive, and it's not proactive, right? Reactive is great, but the nirvana state is actually to be in a proactive mode, where somehow some magic happen, where the system is able to sort of identify that, hey, these should be the right thresholds, and sort of help me apply those thresholds rather than me as an engineer going ahead and choosing by my gut instinct or past observational data saying that this is how things are supposed to be. Can I make the system actually send me back saying that, hey, this is how these are probably the right thresholds for the season. I would call it as a threshold of the season or whatever it is, right? So you would want systems to do that, and you'd want this behavior to change constantly because your applications and the system behavior changes constantly. So it's not a fixed pattern in time to come, right? So which means, how do you make sense of this data for proactive monitoring? How do you sort of handle unknown unknowns? How do you allow product and business users to, I use the word design. I'm not going to say alert, set rules or set alert. I want them to design, for example, some of this, use some of this data to design for their key metrics, which could be their KPIs, and then be automatically notified for violations. And these violations could be either SLO violations, they could be rule-based violations, or they could be data sciences-based violations, right? How do you sort of design models, or a model is again a loose term. How do you sort of design systems that allow these users to come back and keep their key metrics in place, right? And how do you sort of, for example, define the right SLA and SLO adherence, and can we sort of make it better, right? So today, for example, I can say my SLO or SLA is XYZ. Can I sort of make it really better? In essence, what we want to do is we want to improve the overall availability, because why do I need all these systems, right? In an ideal world, on a good day, everything works fine. It is that rainy, bad day where one particular deployment kicks in, or one particular part of the infrastructure goes down, or something goes really, really bad, right? It is in those days that we would probably want some of these systems to actually come in handy, right? And with that, I would like to reduce my MTTD. For those of you who don't know what MTTD is mean time to detect, which means that what is the average time that I take to detect that there is a problem in my system, right? And how do I basically reduce my mean time to detect through a very reasonable unified model? I mean, if you sort of notice Prometheus BI logs, it's a little painful for an engineer today to sort of navigate across all of these systems to actually find anything meaningful. And a lot of the problem is also that if there is an experienced developer who's sort of working on a problem for a fairly long period of time, he or she probably knows where to sort of look for. But it may not be so it leads to sort of a hero syndrome, right? It may not be the case for a new engineer who's joining the company to know where the problem is, right? In essence, how do I provide a single pane of visibility for the behavior of the systems? And what I mean by that is that we do not want to replace any of these systems. We want to actually provide one particular first pane of observability, where I can quickly identify that this is the problem, and then narrow down to, whether it's an infrastructure metric, whether it's a log related stuff, whether it's anywhere else, right? I don't want the system to actually be this granddaddy of everything. I want this guy to be sort of a thin aggregation layer and a thin detection layer of sorts in some sense, which is supposed to give me like the first pane of saying that, hey, notify that, hey, identify that, hey, this is the problem. Because in distributed systems, the problems could be fairly complex, right? I mean, you could have cascading effects. You could have, for example, transient failures. You could have a bunch of other issues that is sort of going on, right? How do I, for example, narrow down the problem? And then once I narrow down the problem or the service or the part of the infrastructure, then it sort of makes sense for me to sort of go back to fix that particular part alone, right? And the other part of the thing is that, like I said, right, Prometheus was sort of, well, I call it broken. How do you sort of improve some of the broken pieces into more robust dashboarding and monitoring capabilities? And of course, we were talking in the middle of, just at the beginning of pandemic, how do I keep my costs low? So we have an internal joke and we call them as tech bunnias. So they are the guys who are supposed to come back and not supposed to, they are the guys who come back and say, hey, you have launched these 5 instances. Why can't you run it on Spot? Why should it be on multiple lazies, right? Those are the kind of questions that you probably get. And it sort of becomes, all jokes aside, it sort of becomes relevant for us in our current times because, well, let's face it, businesses are not growing, right? And we still have to keep up all of these things and build all of these things. How do you sort of reduce your operational cost? And how do you still build reasonably available systems in some sense, right? Great. So some of the questions that we sort of wanted to ask from this kind of a platform is that I observed a dip, success rate dip, for instance, due to some downstream HTTP network service being down. I observed a dip due to some query cache performance. I observed some dip because of some AWS components. I observed a dip because there was surge in traffic. I observed a dip because there were memory CPU constraints. I observed a dip because there was a new deployment, right? I mean, these are some, not all the questions, but these are some of the questions that we sort of had in terms of, what we wanted to sort of lay out and achieve to build in some sense. Great. Am I going too fast or am I on the right pace? Or sorry, I'm just taking a small break here.
Yeah, I think like that's okay. I think audience, if you have specific questions, I think put it up on Slido and we can actually take 2-3 minutes to answer a couple of questions till this point of time, whatever you have heard from Venkat.
Yeah, or if you have any burning questions which
Yeah.
you want to get answered now.
Yeah.
So what I've tried to cover is, for example, why we had to go down to sort of investing in observability, and that's basically the genesis.
I mean, this answers to actually like that's the reason, right? Like this answers to a lot of questions. People see the tools, but they don't know which tool to apply at what point of time in their organization. That's the hardest part.
Yeah, and we will come to some of the tools that we evaluated and what were the problems and why we couldn't adopt some of those tools in the next few slides.
Because it's very easy to over-engineer or under-engineer at all points of time, right? It's never optimal engineering. It's always over or under, but the idea is to stay sane within the bounds. But yeah, audience, please go ahead, and if you have something burning, just taking a minute here to answer something that you need answering. Yes, Gautam is right. Thanos did fix a bunch of scalability bottlenecks recently. So Venkat, have you had time to check into that?
No, we went on to something else because we were on Thanos for almost about a year, and we had a hard mandate to sort of go back to fixed monitoring. In fact, when I was last year when I was in Spain, I did meet one of the engineers. I forgot his name. One of the engineers who was working on Thanos, and I did mention my cribs to him, saying that, hey, look, like it's broken, and he's like, yeah, we have like about 2-3 engineers right now. Like we don't have enough business priority right now to fix Thanos. So, but you should hopefully get a fix. We did wait. We waited a long while, but unfortunately, and I'm not kidding. But I'm saying I'm sure they had their own reasons, right? So,
I think Gautam actually can additionally someday do a whole talk about the potential convergence of Thanos and Cortex, because he has been spearheading parts of those. So
you may not like the part of my talk that follows then, perhaps.
I think yeah, Venkat, let's go ahead.
Let's go ahead.
Okay. So some current insights. This was sort of late 2019, early 2020. Our current log volume, I think we spoke about it already. The number of data points in Prom was roughly around 200 million events per second. This is a combination of infrastructure plus applications. Specifically in terms of New Relic, right? Our overall yearly cost was around 160K USD. This is without, sorry, there's a spelling. It's over edges. It's not over edges. It's roughly around 160K. Now, the moment, for example, I'm doing, for example, log to metric in New Relic, and I'm using other features like insights. And this is, mind you, just application New Relic monitoring. We did not do infrastructure New Relic monitoring. All our infrastructure monitoring was done on Prometheus and Grafana, right? So the moment I'm basically tying in my infrastructure, the moment I'm basically trying in other products like insights, the moment I'm basically trying in log to metric, and I'm trying in, for example, something like distributed tracing. I mean, in that time, of course, we also realized that we had to go into distributed tracing, sorry. So the moment I'm putting in all of those things, each of these single pieces basically become cost by themselves, right? Also, what interestingly happened was our monthly active users on APM, which is New Relic, was roughly around 70. Out of a 230 engineering team, only about 70 people were sort of using New Relic in a month. And the weekly recurring users were still about 30. Large portions of application developers who were basically on, and this 70 and 30 was also very, very specifically on the set of folks who are actually working on the monolithic application, which is in Laravel. The rest of the folks were actually largely working on, the Golang applications, where pure converts into Prometheus. But again, Prometheus was sort of broken. But so they had, for example, logs, and Prometheus was, for example, their only visualization tool, right? They did not really go back to New Relic. Also, New Relic had some very crazy ways of actually reporting certain data, which is to do with memory, CPU, Go routines, JVM metrics, etc. So the kind of data that New Relic sort of used to plot was significantly different from, for example, on Kubernetes, we have something called a C advisor. So my node and CPU metrics, or my pod CPU and pod memory metrics that Prometheus reports, was very, very different from what New Relic reports. So which means that if I'm conducting a performance test, we don't know what to believe. Should I believe New Relic? Should I believe Prometheus? Right? The source of truth was not very clear, right? And then we had multiple times we went back to revisit our container and infrastructure metrics to actually realize that what Prometheus was giving was reasonably close enough to the reality compared to what Neuralink was sort of doing. And inherently, something like Neuralink is not container native. It's a late realization of scale. Is not container native both in terms of cost or otherwise. So for example, Neuralink or any of these APM, lot of these APM tools work on CPU slabs or memory slabs. What it means is that if you are basically having the total, if you are basically having that 5 instances each of about, let's say 2 cores, totally you're talking about 10 cores, they will say until up to 5 cores the cost is so much, until up to 10 cores the cost is so much, until up to 20 cores the cost is so much, right? The problem is that if I'm running multiple containers, all of these containers are sharing the same CPU or memory of the node. Unfortunately, the way Neuralink sort of computes is the cost is not very container native also. That's something that we should have realized much earlier, but we sort of realized it anyway. Better late than never, right? So we sort of realized all of these things largely around Neuralink, and it was sort of not making sense to sort of do distributed tracing and do all this instrumentation and still keep the vendor to Neuralink, right? And pay so much money and pay more money for other features that we want to sort of intake. Now, our future predictions, for example, if we roughly assume that we're going to go by about 2.5x scale, mind you, this was something that was done in 2019. We didn't expect Corona, right? So if we, for example, did a conservative growth of around 2.5x by 2020-21, our net distributed event spans was roughly coming out close to about 197 billion events per year. And this is sort of the rough math. Is 12% the right number? Yes, we had some calculations done on that. So net, this is also a very staggering figure, right? Which means that how am I going to of course, I don't have to host all the 197 billion events per day in one place, but even 500 million events per day and making sense of that is not a trivial problem, right? And this is, mind you, with conservative growth of 2.5x and with a lot of sampling in place, right? Great. Okay. Now, then with this, we said, okay, let's lay out some initial goals of what we wanted to sort of achieve. So how are you going to first build a single pane of observability? Where should devs look at on that bad day, right? How do you sort of work at logs to metrics? Can you use, for example, metric variations for alerting and then dig down to the specific logs? There's a strong need for enabling tracing and distributed tracing in our applications. We wanted to replace Neuralink with something cheaper and something that is container native. We wanted to rebuild, replace, or extend Prometheus or Grafana to be more robust, which means low to no query timeouts and long-term metric retention. I mean long-term metric, we don't mean like a year of metric. We are roughly talking about a month-old metric, right? Because that's a month is good enough for you to sort of know something has gone wrong. I mean, if you've not known that in a month something has gone wrong, we are probably in a different kind of a problem altogether. So we'll assume that a month is good enough for us to know what the problem is. And largely, once you have all of this data, right, how do you make sense out of it? Which means, can I sort of power or propel this data to a sciences, machine learning based, sciences based platform, which can help me detect the patterns and which can give me back a feedback loop, right? I don't want it to sort of replace anything. I wanted to complement it with my system in terms of it actually doing all the work, detecting all the patterns, detecting all the anomalies, detecting all the outliers, and then figuring out are these the right thresholds and giving me back a feedback to my existing alerting and monitoring systems. And that's the goal that we sort of wanted to achieve in a Nirvana state, right? First question in terms of fixing Prometheus, right? So we wanted to, for example, so current monitoring, this was where we stood. Our current monitoring is done by this, Prometheus HA, we already spoke about it. We had multiple Prometheus instances. We have instances for capturing our infrastructure metrics, which is AWS CloudWatch and CAdvisor. We had application-specific metrics, and then we had application-specific, non-CD metrics. Thanos solved the HA part, but didn't go beyond a couple of hours in terms of retention. Our hardware cost of running all of these instances is roughly close to around 12,000 USD. Okay, this is not a funny figure. For those of you who don't know, and Prometheus HA pass actually doubles it. We used to have so many Prometheus instances at one particular point of time. And our current production numbers, this is somewhere in early 2020. Data points growth per second is around 186K, and this is bytes per point. That's the image that you see is basically Prometheus actually bloating out fire all the way and bleeding to the teeth, right? Sorry, funny graphics. So what do we want? Can we write PROM data to a better place such that querying, alerting, and dashboarding can happen from there faster, while PROM manages only the incoming data and writes there? Which is, they don't want PROM basically doing a lot of things, evil things. It just cuts it, gets it, and then says, okay, boss, now this is not my problem. You do what you want with it, right? And can we reduce the cost? Goes back to Tech Banya, right? The solutions that were available to us was Cortex, Victoria Metrics, and M3DB. we chose Cortex. It's a CNCF project, Grafana Labs, impressive metrics, robust architecture, brilliant, right? All works well on stage. We moved to production and we were running on a shadow mode. And what I mean by shadow mode is we were actually having Thanos and we were doing a remote write from Prometheus to Cortex. So Cortex was configured as an additional data source in Grafana. So you could sort of at any point of time flip back the data source from one place to the other, right? And we said, yeah, okay, all's well that ends well, right? Really? I don't know. Okay, so a brief introduction into what Cortex does, right? So Cortex is pretty interesting, right? So so you have a bunch of components in Cortex. So there is something called as, I mean, should I go into this? Is it even relevant or?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. We'd love to see. We'd love to know your views on Cortex.
This is truly a talk in itself, though.
Yeah, this is a talk in itself. Actually, this slide and the next slide is a talk in itself.
But I'm pretty sure now that the audience have heard this much, they need some understanding of why it did not work for you. So please go ahead.
Okay. So, dude, you're just breaking the myth, man. Come on. I was supposed to say that. All right. Great. So, like I said, we had this Prometheus. Think of this as one Prometheus instance, right? So this Prometheus instance used to basically write to all of this layer that you see below here. All of this is basically what Cortex is, right? So Prometheus writes to, of course, think of this as a load balancer. It could be Nginx, it could be traffic, it could be HA proxy, it could be anything. It doesn't matter what it is, right? So think of this as a load balancer. Now the load balancer, what the load balancer does is that it basically writes it to this agent, this component called as a distributor. Now the distributor's job is to basically, distributor actually doesn't write it to the remote data store. The distributor in fact pushes it to something called as ingester, right? And the way it pushes it to ingester is it basically maintains, for example, standard election process. So it for example takes a particular metric, it converts basically a hash key out of that. Based on the hash key is used as a routing key. Using the hash key, it basically puts it to one of the ingester nodes, and all of these components are highly available, right? So they've done a brilliant job at making sure that there is nothing which is non-highly available, right? So how does it, for example, figure out that what is the ingester that it needs to sort of write to? It basically contacts something called as console. So console is sort of an inherent component that is sort of needed for Cortex to work. And ingesters, for example, when they come up, they register themselves with console. So that's exactly how the service discovery between the distributor and the ingester happens. So the distributor gets a metric, it figures out the hash key. Based on the hash key, it routes it to the ingester. The ingester has the ability to sort of hold a lot of data in its memory for immediate querying purposes. And the reason it does it design-wise, and it's a nice design, the reason it actually does it is that it wants to reduce the back pressure on writing to a remote data store. And the remote data store could be Bigtable, which is not in our view of things because we are on AWS. DynamoDB, S3, Cassandra, any of these things, right? So you really wouldn't want like that the number that we, for example, spoke about 186K. You don't want every single such data actually going into the data store, because your data store is going to be, well, the data store cannot be HA, or it cannot be HA beyond a certain point, right? And you don't want to also reduce pressure. And then specifically in certain kinds of data stores, you have to worry about consistency. In Cassandra, exactly, you have to worry about consistency. What kind of consistency you're going to use? Are you going to use a local quorum? Are you just going to use a plain quorum? Are you going to use local one, right? All of those complexities exist, right? So you want to sort of reduce the number of writes to the database. So it sort of maintains a large portion of its metric in memory. Now, when Grafana, for example, again has to go through this load balancer, which talks to a query front end, and the query front end, think of it again as an equivalent parlance for a distributor. Your querier is the one that figures out how do a querier again contacts console, because it needs to know for a given time series or a metric data, which ingester that does I need to talk. So it sort of combines the data from your ingester and from your remote data store, which would be this boy here. It combines all of this data and then feeds it back. Internally, the querier also sort of, to reduce, for example, the gaps, your querier also, for example, maintains data in in a remote memory store like Memcache. Redis was sort of experimental at that particular point of time when we evaluated. So Memcache was it, right? And then Memcache basically it uses something called as a Memcache chunks table, and then it uses a Memcache index table. This is sort of standard hash key indexing policy. So it sort of figures data from here. If it is not available here, then it goes to the ingester. If it's not, it goes to the remote data store. It sort of aggregates all of these things and gives it back to the query front end, which in turn gives it back to this thing, right? And of course, your query front end also has a results cache. So it doesn't have to, for every query, doesn't have to go here. Good part of the problem is that metric data is immutable, right? Once a metric is emitted, it's emitted. So once you've cached it for a particular duration, it's not really largely going to change, right? All of this was brilliant, right? Because it's fantastic architecture. Everything sort of works well. Everything sort of scales well, beautifully works well, right? And we said, okay, this is lovely. Again, this is the other part here is in terms of the alert manager and all of these things, right? So it was all working fine till something bad happened. And what bad really happened was this. So the setup was done on stage and it was running quite successfully. I mean, when I say stage, we were basically doing perf testing on our staging environment, which basically means that our perf environment used to sort of generate almost 5x traffic of production for us to do some sanity builds, right? So if it had sustained such a long run, we assume that, okay, things should work fine in production, right? So we did a whole lot of capacity planning exercises. If you sort of notice, there are a lot of moving parts, and to keep the costs low, we try to run a variety of things in spot instances. We try to run a variety of things in on-demand instances. We were running mixed spot. Mixed spot is basically where we say a certain portion of our infrastructure runs on spot, and if spot fails, we used ASG tags to basically move it to on-demand. So we did quite a few capacity optimizations and planning optimizations. We moved to production by end of May, and suddenly things started breaking around 2 to 3 days with constant manual intervention. Why did this happen? This happened because the ingester nodes were constantly going down for some reason or the other, right? So which basically means that we had to really go back and literally fine tune my Kubernetes request limits and our CPU limits. So I fix CPU, memory goes bad. I fix memory, CPU goes bad. I had to bump up the nodes. That also did not work. I mean, that worked for a while till more metrics came in. So it was a constant pain to sort of say the very least, right? Worst part was that there were some extremely high cardinality metrics. For example, we want to measure, we had this one particular query, which is, I want to basically measure the HTTP request, total number of requests for a particular mode, which is basically a live mode or a test mode, for a particular route in 5 minutes. And I want to group it, for example, by the application name, right? Now this query, for example, when I load it in Grafana, and this query becomes intrinsically important to me because heck, this is one query that's going to tell me if my requests have actually dropped or not for a particular route, right? The moment I basically do this query and I say run it for 5 minutes, this process that you're seeing here, right? Query to ingester to this, it came back and said that, hey, I'm querying, for example, cardinality data of some 3 some 12-digit number, and I cannot do query this, buzz off, right? So Grafana broke. Grafana basically just said it's a query error, simple, right? Eventual capacity to get this sort of working was 10 ingester pods, which were actually nodes, because we sort of just ran it with pod anti-affinity. We said, let's not play around with ingesters. Let's just run with node and pod anti-affinity. So 10 dedicated nodes are given to ingester, 5 distributors, 3 console nodes, 5 Cassandra nodes. Okay, so why did we go to Cassandra? Again, there are other problems. So their support, like I said, right, was DynamoDB/S3/ Cassandra for us. So DynamoDB became, though they claimed that DynamoDB was inexpensive, when we ran it with DynamoDB, our stage costs for DynamoDB was pretty expensive, which means we had an option to move into S3 and Cassandra. Interestingly for us, the problem with S3 was that AP Southwind, which is Mumbai, has something called as a V4 signing as a part of the protocol, right? So the ingester did not have support for a V4 signing. So we could have not used S3. So what does it leave us with? That left us only with Cassandra, which means Cassandra will eventually also become a bottleneck for us, right? So in all, what we ended up discovering was this is a complete disaster. So it's actually 24th of May, I forgot, not 24th of June. It's a complete disaster that started happening. What should have been caught? We should have time wasted and lessons learned the hard way. Nevertheless, we did it. I'm sorry to say, but Cortex was suffering from ADHD, so it needed serious babysitting, right? In certain places, the Slack group was not responsive. This is not a pitching session or a cribbing session, but I'm just noting down my observations, right? The cost and available choices for us, S3, DynamoDB, Cassandra, we spoke about it. So what now, right? So we said, okay, let's fix dashboarding. What now, right? So, well, we went to Victoria Metrics. I'm just calling it a center of the queen, for lack of a better word, right? Victoria Metrics, on the other hand, was a reasonably simple, set of components. So it just had simply just 3 things. It had, of course, the load balancer. There is an insert agent, which is stateless. There is a select, which is stateless. The only stateful component was this thing called a storage. Now, what storage does is that storage basically attaches itself to a EBS volume. And mind you, all of this was running inside Kubernetes, right? So this was a stateful set. These 2 were deployments. Of course, you had a Kubernetes service. The Kubernetes service was sort of exposed. And so pretty much it sort of did a lot of work in terms of basically just taking and simply writing to it. And what we ended up doing was, like I said, right, on the 24th of May or whatever it is, that day when it broke down, overnight, a few of us actually sat down. We should have ideally not done it that way, but we just said that it needs to be fixed. So we sat down overnight to actually bring up Victoria Metrics in production and said, let's just route it. Let's just do the remote prom to VM of sorts. And beautiful working, because what it does is that all of this metric data, for example, it has an extremely, I mean, there's a beautiful algorithm that they've sort of published as well. In terms of the compression rate was around 70%. We could run it on commodity hardware, and we took some of the worst dashboards. This kind of dashboard was just one. We had at least about 10 to 12 such really bad dashboards. We just bombarded the query endpoint with these dashboards to see whether we were hitting any issues. And thus far, for the last few months, we've been running this. Yes, horizontal scaling is challenging, because you will still need to add more nodes or more pods as and when the requests go up. But we don't have to really babysit anything. I mean, because everything was just smoothly working, right? So what we ended up doing was we actually ran Victoria Metrics on commodity hardware, which means that technically we actually ran both these things actually on spot nodes with over provisioning. We didn't have to actually put on-demand instances. We only put on-demand instances for the VM storage. So these two are actually running on spot, are still actually continuing to run on spot, right? And then prom remote write to Victoria Metrics, the existing prom cost was actually reduced to half. If you remember, I said we are spending about 12K because prom was doing a lot of things with Thanos, etc., etc. We reduced this entire, shaved off half the cost of Prometheus. We re-architected Prometheus also. When I say re-architected Prometheus, what we did was that we said, let us, for example, set up individual HA pairs of Prometheus for different kinds of use cases. And our use cases are actually BUs in this case. So we had about 4 or 5 BUs. We said we'll set up different Prometheus HA pairs for each of these BUs, and then a bunch of Prometheus HA pairs for the infrastructure. Not HA pairs, I mean, bunch of HA pairs for the infrastructure. And now, how do you sort of monitor Victoria Metrics itself, right? So we actually set up a Prometheus to monitor Victoria Metrics itself, right? Because you sort of need that monitoring as well, right? You need to do that. Either you monitor Victoria Metrics through another Victoria Metrics, or you monitor Victoria Metrics through prom, right? Well, I mean, there is not really other way. The dashboards were loading very smooth. Adoption was easier. Again, like we said, what we did was that we went ahead to change the default data source for many of the applications. We did that, and then we asked our developers to actually go ahead and say, hey, change the data source to Victoria Metrics, and it should sort of work fine. We moved our alerts from existing alert manager to VM alert. It's running in production for over a quarter. It's pretty smooth. What we also did was we actually added GitOps-based workflows for both alert creation as well as for dashboard creation. Default edition, we kept it for 1 month. Like I said, we re-architected prom. What we want to do going ahead is we want to actually replace prom with VM agent. We are seeing some promising results on our non-production environment. It claims to reduce overall hardware footprint. And these are some numbers that we would, well, post or whatever you want to call it. So net put together, we have close to about 2.9 trillion data points, and our data growth actually has increased. And this is the bytes per data that we have. And all of this number works actually wonderfully well. I mean, this is just, this number is something that I just drew out, pulled out yesterday from actually the Victoria Metrics graph itself. And yeah. Now, with that in place, any questions on this? Sorry, Joy and Pranay.
Hey, Venkat, there's a question by Suman.
Hey, how many total time series do you have?
Sorry, what?
How many time series?
How many time series? I didn't get your question.
So data points is basically how frequently you collect, right? So how many times is it like metric name plus stack combination? How many unique?
This is the data point. Each of this X cross Y cross
so,
Z.
Venkat, I think what Suman means is that one of the core metrics to track Prometheus performance is to measure the number of time series that you are actually consuming. So I'm not sure that
I don't have that number right now, but I can get that number offline. I should look
at what does data point growth mean? Is that data points added per second, or is that
it is data points added per second?
Okay, I see. So that's not like that's not cumulative, right? So this second you add 363, next second you add 363 plus 363.
This is average.
Okay, but it's not cumulative.
It's not cumulative.
Okay.
So that means that you're adding 700 KB per second, right?
700 KB.
Like 363 into 2. Is that the right calculation?
Pretty much, yes. We have right now. So also we said this is from the Victoriometrics perspective. You may want to remember this point. It does a 70% compression.
Okay.
Right. So with the compressed thing on Victoriometrics side, this is the number that comes up. I can actually pull out the Prometheus metrics and I can probably help you understand on Prom side what we are seeing. But unfortunately, the problem with that is that I cannot get a aggregated view. I'll have to basically go to each of the Prom instances to actually get a sum view in terms of the total metric data point collected on Prom side and how much is actually getting pushed to, how much does it translate to on the how much does it translate to on the Victoriometrics side? If you understood what I mean? Like I have X number of Prom instances. Each of those Prom instances will come up with a combination of these numbers. Sum of all of those things will be the total amount of metrics that I'm sort of collecting at any point of time. That going into Victoriometrics, and the compression is what you're actually seeing here.
Got it. And this total data points is just the aggregate, right? Like the cumulative.
This is a sum.
Got it.
This is a sum. The reason why this number is interesting to me is because each of these data points are queryable, right? And the more such data points that you have, so if you sort of look at it, right, the cardinality for something like this is massive, will be massive. Imagine, for example, a dashboard which is sort of adding one cardinality figure called as a merchant ID. And there are some dashboards that do, right? If I just say HTTP route and I say merchant ID as a other tag, you can sort of see the cardinality explosion, right? And that makes it worse because all of that goes into this, right? And Victoriometrics, one bad point is that it doesn't do downsampling, right? So because it doesn't do downsampling, how am I supposed to basically still get queryable metrics or queryable data, right? That becomes a challenge largely. But again, I mean, we sort of realized that okay, what we have actually done on this side also is that there are certain configuration parameters where we said that for you to sort of know, because it is HA, the metric store has to be consistent, right? So we say mark a metric as, there's a configuration parameter which says mark a metric. So we say mark a metric as consistent after a certain unit of time. So we say we wait largely for about 2 minutes or 1 minute before we can sort of mark a metric as consistent, which means that my overall delay would be anywhere around a minute or two, depending on how sooner or later the data arrives.
Got it.
Right. Any other questions? Sorry, Joy.
No, I'm cool. I'm just like checking on the Telegram.
No. I'm saying sorry, Joy, to burst the Cortex bubble.
No, I mean it like depends on the context again, right?
Context,
So, yeah.
So, no, nothing wrong, but it just didn't work for us. Let's put it that way, right?
Fair enough.
So the distributed tracing, again, we started work somewhere in Q1 2020. Our key monolithic application is still running on Laravel PHP. It only supports, so PHP only has support for OpenCensus. For those of you who don't know, it doesn't support, it doesn't know what OpenTelemetry is. Open tracing with Agar, well, it's under works. It's not really working. So specifically, the OpenCensus library for PHP, since OpenCensus is sort of dead, it's sort of unmaintained. But unfortunately, we didn't have a choice. We had to use this. There were memory bloats during the initial instrumentation. There were missing features. Redis and a few other features were sort of missing. We tried to file upstream PRs, but unfortunately, because of the fact that it was unmaintained, we didn't get a lot of good response time. What we ended up doing was we actually ended up forking and fixing it for anybody who's interested in working or who's working on the PHP side. And if you still want some sort of a tracing instrumentation, well, that's the repo there for you to sort of use. Golang applications, on the other hand, we originally started with GoGen as the framework. We started moving into gRPC. So what it also means is that we, as I said, right, as part of our re-architecture and a bunch of other things, we started developing frameworks and toolkits for building Golang applications. So we made tracing as a first-class citizen in all of these frameworks. So what it ended up doing was, for existing applications which are based on GoGen, we had to write some tooling. And for newer applications, the new framework that we're sort of building, we call it as Go Foundation. Go Foundation is an internal framework that we're building to sort of generate microservices, generate Golang applications. So that internally had tracing as a first-class citizen. So which means that we ended up writing libraries and or wrappers for internal consumption. Yes, we plan to open source it once we have. There are certain opinionated thought processes. We want to see how we can sort of remove that before we can actually go to open source some of these things. Now, also, we didn't want to dabble around with too many formats. I mean, as a company, it sort of doesn't make sense. I mean, we have to control our outflow, right? As a company, it doesn't make sense to support, hey, let's support Agar also, let's support Zipkin also, let's support this also. It doesn't make sense. So we said, okay, we are going to support Agar as a unified format and eventually move into OpenTelemetry, because sticking to one sort of makes it good, bad, ugly, however flexible, inflexible it is. It sort of helps us sort of contain the problem area and not sort of diverge into a number of things. I mean, we were not, we were not building a commercial product. We were largely solving the problem for an internal use case. And it made sense for us to say, stick to one and build it down, right? And we had a thought, we are running in certain places, we're running it as sidecars, in certain places, we're running it as daemon sets. The collector was on, so the OTel collector, OpenTelemetry collector was something that was sort of fronted to sort of receive the spans, and this actually forwards to Kafka. Well, not really, it internally exports to, at the time we sort of looked at it, it didn't have a direct Kafka exporter. In the last 1.5 months, there's a Kafka exporter that has come up. So we will be replacing, the only purpose of the Agar collector to run was to just receive the spans and write it to Kafka. But now we can sort of go about to replace that. The choice of this data store that we had, the eventual data store that Agar spans puts up, it was between Elasticsearch and Cassandra. We did a cost estimation on Elasticsearch. Again, we didn't want to manage Elasticsearch because it's not, we already are managing about a couple of Elasticsearch instances. It didn't make sense to add more. We said, okay, let's leverage self-managed versus AWS managed. Net put together, the cost was coming up close to around 46K USD with some of the calculations that we did based on the trace data sampling cost that we did, right? The presumption or the idea was to stick to OpenTelemetry as a default standard for all span processing. We didn't, like I said, want to dabble around with n number of formats. Again, the challenge is that as we speak, OpenTelemetry is sort of nearing a 1.0 release, right? So between the time that we sort of took to actually get here to there, a couple of protocol formats also started changing. For example, we had to run OpenTelemetry for, OpenTelemetry dictates that you run the collector as Docker image / dev : latest. Now, not pinning an image version was scary, right? The moment I pinned an image version and it did an upgrade, it was problematic because it broke the protocol formats, right? So yeah, so all sorts of operational nonsense. But anyway, right? So we said, okay, might as well just, because it did happen, right? Because the pod went down, it said dev latest. By the time those guys had upgraded the image, it pulled in, it broke the protocol format, right? I mean, well, now what do you do? So I mean, it was foolish on our part, but I largely assume that when you're putting that in the documentation, you assume that you're keeping it sane, but turns out it wasn't. But anyway, so those were other problems that sort of started happening. So we went ahead with Cassandra. The model of the stories went ahead with Cassandra, and we wanted also, now with Cassandra, there are other complications that sort of arise, right? So you needed to, for example, clean up your data. Now, unfortunately, Cassandra cleanup is little inefficient compared to Elasticsearch. In Elasticsearch, I can, for example, do a very targeted index cleanup. Unfortunately, I can't do that in Cassandra. Cassandra cleanup means it's an entire index scan, and that is complex, right? So we had to introduce other, well, for the lack of a better word, hanky-panky things to sort of get that cleanup done on the Cassandra side. Because we wanted to keep the data retention in Cassandra as limited as possible. OTel collectors, okay, so other challenges encountered, right? I think like Suman mentioned, right? It doesn't support, they have a tail-based sampling, but it's bogus. And what I mean by it's bogus is that if I have multiple, collector endpoints, each collector endpoint implements its own tail sampling. Now, it's not of much use because I could have my application, ideally like talking, even if it is a Kubernetes service endpoint, I could have my application going at any point of time, the trace data going at any point of time to any of the collectors, right? So if I just have plain simple tail sampling on one collector instance, it doesn't solve much because it doesn't encompass the entire life cycle of the trace of sort. I wouldn't even say span, life cycle of a trace, right? So it makes it completely useless for many scenarios. And I don't say this. There is a Grafana blog post where there is a certain gentleman who had sort of forked off the OpenTelemetry code, and he had sort of built tail sampling where he had made the OTel collectors stateful, which means that all of the OTel collectors talk amongst themselves because it was built in Kubernetes. He uses Kubernetes service discovery. Because it's a .svc endpoint, he introduces a headless service. Via the headless service, he discovers that these are the services. Now, these are the services he basically He does a tail sampling, exports it to one of the other collectors. The other collector receives it. It does a tail sampling, exports it back. So there's a lot of these, east-west communication that was sort of happening between the collector agents themselves, right? So we said, okay, that looks interesting. And then, I mean, they used a nice hashing algorithm to sort of, figure out unassociated traces. We said, okay, that looks interesting. Let's try it. Unfortunately, we are back to the product of breakage. So what had happened was that the version that he had committed was about 6 months back. So he tried to file an upstream PR with OTIL, but OTIL guys said that this is too complex. You're not going to accept your PR. So he ended up creating a fork. Now, again, the problem is that the Grafana endpoint, it's there in the blog post, the Grafana endpoint just has a branch. It doesn't have issues. Okay, which means if there are issues, you can't really file it. You can't fix it. Okay, I don't know why, Joy, I don't know why you're laughing.
Well, the person who made the fork, Ananay from Grafana, he was a speaker in the previous session. So, yeah.
So, yeah,
no, it's okay.
The challenge was how do I know that there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So you open a GitHub fork, you maintain issue model, right? Like nice issue model, right? That wasn't maintained. So what we said was, okay, let's make a personal fork out of it. But even with the personal fork, what was sort of happening was that because of this hash string association, they were sort of changing the annotation format. The code was sort of changing the annotation format, right? In fact, I do have a personal fork here mentioned here that actually fixes it with the newest OTIL collector format, right? I mean, hopefully, and they claim that that's not going to change till version 1.0. But the problem was that we got into quite a few issues where because of this hashing algorithm, they changed the span annotation. Because the span annotation changes, I actually have referential spans coming in with a random child of reference model, and that was nasty because I can't make sense out of it, right? Again, it doesn't solve a lot of composite patterns. When I say it doesn't solve a lot of composite patterns, I have to run tail sampling as a front end before my actual sampling. What I mean by that is that the tail sampling samples the traces and then sends it to another set of processes, which is supposed to do a bunch of things. Like, for example, I would like to ideally answer questions saying that, hey, sample trace data for service A whose latency is more than X%. I would want to have very finite, atomic, granular levels of configuration that's possible, because each service could come up with its own variations of things in some sense, right? All of those things are sort of not possible. Now, the other part of the problem is that if I'm doing sampling can I, for example, move all of this to the agent side? Why even transmit it over the network? I might as well just avoid the network cost, right? Can agents, for example, handle sampling? And the other part of the problem is that can I, for example, now implicitly span data? I think like somebody asked in the previous talk, right? Span data doesn't carry a lot of contextual boundary around certain aspects. For example, infrastructure context, Kubernetes specific context, for example, in our world, right? Can I, for example, have the pod, cluster, zone, AWS zone, IP, user agent, for example, if it's a standard web serving application, if my application is not instrumenting for some reason user agent, can I, for example, collect some of those information? And if I collect some of those information, can I make sense out of it? There are some OTIL concept examples for this, but again, we needed to extend. We realized that we needed to extend some of these things as well. Span declaration, I think this has been extensively spoken about in the last talk, right? We needed to normalize the spans. I mean, because the span data can get extremely wide, especially, for example, in the Aegir world. I don't know why they did that. So ideally, for example, you have a tag. You would ideally want to keep tags as just a map. So what they ended up doing was they created it as a list of map. Now, when I'm doing as a list of map, I can't do native JSON expansion. What I mean is, if I just have a map, I can directly take it and dump it into something like Elasticsearch and make sure that it just has like multiple records. But because it is a list of spans, I am sort of forced to write transformation to convert the list of spans into a map of list of maps. I'm forced to write transformations to convert into a list of map into a map of maps, so that I can basically do flattening. I would ideally want to do flattening, right? I cannot do that today with some of these things, right? The second aspect is that OpenTelemetry has come up with a decent and a very, very decent set of standardization around some of the tags itself, right? Can we sort of normalize these tags? And then, for example, add additional enrichment layers on top of these spans, using which can I, for example, build better visualizations for supporting my SLA dashboards, better service discovery, better query engine, right? What did we achieve? We ended up achieving basically most of our critical applications are now enabled with tracing. We have a framework for new applications. We ended up supporting an end-to-end set of traces for database, cache, queue, network, and other interacting components. We set explicit limits on Cassandra to minimize the retention policies, because you cannot, at the moment it's kept for a week, which we believe is still high, but well, business will want some data around that. And so does engineering. We built additional pipelines to transform all of this trace data. And what we ended up doing was that, so Cassandra solves for me my immediate real-time need, but to actually get it into more a beautiful scenario for a long-term thing, we transformed all of this data, rewrote it back into Kafka, which was fed directly into Druid. Now, because of the fact that it goes into Druid, like Suman mentioned, right? So we now have, for example, rich querying capabilities with SQL, right? So either whether I can use direct Druid itself, or I can use other BI tools which is written on top of Druid, which means now not only does my problem for engineering get solved, I can potentially expose this interface to my product folks as well, provided they are able to operate with standard SQL like operations, right? And or build additional dashboards on top of it, right? So the Druid ingestion pipeline for us, I mean, today we're using Druid. We may look at in a while for other because there are certain advantages that gives over Druid. Long-term dashboarding, we have solved now that problem through Druid and with the BI tool. Now the Jaeger UI is a bit restrictive, and I think we have spoken about it, right? It's a bit clunky because it tells me immediately when a problem is happening, but it doesn't have rich querying capability. So for example, I want to say, list out, for example, the worst performing routes whose database latency is, for example, 10 milliseconds and cache latency is Y milliseconds. I can't run sophisticated queries like that. Or I cannot answer sophisticated questions that you sort of post using the Jaeger UI, right? And also, one of the lacking features is that in case something goes wrong, Jaeger as a framework or as a toolkit doesn't give me any notification mechanisms. I am forced to sort of build all of these notification mechanisms, which is now implicitly integrated with my data lake stores, right? And like I said, custom rule sets, examples like I spoke about. So the day we sort of introduced it, roughly we are seeing in an hour, we are seeing close to about 6 million traces per hour. I don't know if it's a good number or a bad number. One thing that we sort of realized is that our sampling of 12% that we did still needs to come down, right? Some also challenges, like I said, we are working with attribute-based sampling. And what I mean by attribute-based sampling is that, like I said, tail sampling doesn't work. In attribute-based sampling, what you're saying is that sample, for example, all 2x, sample for all example, all 2xx and 3xx by 5%. For all 4xx and for anything which is greater than 3xx, don't sample it at all, right? Now, unfortunately, again, for a rule like that, right, I would ideally like to have a regex in an attribute sample. Attribute, in this case, is HTTP status code. I would like to have, like, say, HTTP status code where status code in 4xx, 5xx, whatever. Unfortunately, the attribute-based sampling doesn't support that. So the configuration is a bit clunky. We are, for example, filing as we speak a PR where the attributes-based sampling on the orbital side can actually have list and regex-based sampling. Also, for example, what we cannot solve with attribute-based sampling today is, like I said, attribute-based sampling just says that, hey, sample X or sample Y. I cannot, for example, do sophisticated policies, for example, with my latencies or other additional constructs. One of the other things that Jaeger guys are also working towards is adaptive sampling. We probably need to look at that. We are also, as we speak, building data pipelines for this span normalizing, structured tracing. So the way we are trying to stall the tracing structure is actually throwing schema registry into the mix. And the reason why we have done that is inherently anyway, most of the data is going through Kafka. You might as well basically put schema registry attached to that particular thing, so that whether we like it or not, the span data comes out normalized, which means that all my trace enrichment and structurings of the span gets potentially and inherently solved by schema registry. And most of these pipelines that we have written it in Golang. We want to sort of move it into Splink because of better processing, inherently useful with Kafka, etc., right? I'm going to stop here. Any questions, or am I running short of time? Oh, grossly.
Yeah, sort of, that's okay. But I think as long as folks are interested and we still have enough folks hanging around for the talk, so I think this is good. So yeah, Pranay will forward questions or start taking questions right now. I think you can send the Slido link to Vivi or show it directly here.
Can I just cover two more slides?
Oh, sorry. I thought you have finished. Sorry. You said that. Yeah, good. Please go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just breaking. Okay. So
Okay,
what we ended up, sorry, what we ended up eventually doing for a target state architecture was this. So which is, I have my applications or my nodes. I'm using logging, tracing, etc., etc. So logging is here, tracing is here. Like I said, we are also emitting events, which goes into event stream, and of course my monitoring systems here, right? What we want to do is the single pane of observability is we want to actually collect all of this, visualize, do anomaly detection, generate baselines, and being able to do actually forecasting, right? And then any violations on this, and this is roughly the platform that we're sort of, this is the platform work that we're sort of building towards, right? So then what we do is that any violations on this, can I, for example, integrate it with my alerting notification monitoring layers, right? There are some, there is some work that already exists. There are these tools called as Hypertrace that sort of solve the problem in some fashion. But the problem again with Hypertrace is that it sort of introduces too many components, right? It uses, for example, MongoDB for something else. It introduces something else for something else, right? We wanted to keep as limited moving components as possible. We didn't want to sort of, for example, work with some 500 different components, right? We want to keep as limited components as possible, because then monitoring those infrastructure, monitoring the monitoring components itself becomes challenging if you have too many moving parts. I mean, that's a lesson that we've learned in the hard way, right? Now, for doing this this part, right, what we have tried to do is that we have actually we are using something called as Third Eye. Third Eye is a tool by LinkedIn. Again, it is a custom tool that is built for LinkedIn. Very poor documentation, but it does some beautiful baselining and anomaly detection for us. So what we have done right now is that thus far, what we have actually done is we have actually taken the event streaming data, and we have taken some parts of the tracing data, and we've actually thrown it into this, and it gives us like a beautiful baseline in terms of, you know, what has sort of changed, right? What is sort of at a high level, this is how it will sort of look like, right? So you would ideally want to have, for example, okay, this is a slightly old diagram, but anyway, I thought I had a new diagram. Anyway, so you had, for example, your Prometheus and Grafana, which sort of works at this particular layer. What we ended up doing was we basically did a remote read. Actually, this is not going to do it. This is actually a Presto connector. We ended up doing a remote read from this BI visualization layer, this machine learning and BI visualization layer. So Prometheus basically exports up a Presto format, so we can do a direct Presto read from here. All of this event data, etc., like we said, is going into Druid. So the machine learning / visualization layer can directly read off Druid. Anomaly detection can actually power back, and then this is a feedback loop that can go back to my, like I said, this is not going to replace, this is going to complement my existing system, which is I basically put back my machine learning model observations back into my alert manager of sorts in some sense, right? This is the target state architecture. Now where have we come here thus far? So this part is reasonably solved. When I say reasonably solved, like I said, with all the collector issues that we had, we are able to get the data here, and then we're able to build nice baselining here. We are able to, this line should ideally be, this line here should ideally be pointing to this, because this layer automatically has a Presto connector where we are basically using Prometheus Presto to actually talk to Prometheus to extract out all of this particular information. Now, this is basically the visualization layer, and also this is the visualization layer that is exposed to engineers, and this is actually the visualization layer that's built exposed to engineers and product managers, from where product managers, business folks, etc., from where they can create their reports and leaderboards, etc., etc. We have not solved, for example, the anomaly detection, because right now we have only come back to the baselining part of it and deviations in baseline. What I mean by baseline is that how are my week over week metrics looking, how are my month over month metrics looking, etc., etc. And those baseline deviations is something that we have been able to arrive at. We are working as we speak on the anomaly detection part of it. And this model feedback building is not something that we have sort of implemented. This is not implemented. This again needs to happen. And a lot of optimizations on a lot of these layers, because the scale of data and the growth of data is the biggest challenge as we speak, right? So yeah, so like I said, these are the things that we were sort of able to achieve. And yes, we as a company, we as a team have been able to convince having a multi-year roadmap for observability, because this is not a problem that we can solve in a single day or a single quarter. As an organization, we all need to sign up and say that yes, it can lead to this. And heavy focus is going to be on open sourcing, leveraging open source, and or contributing to open source. So any like-minded individuals and or organizations who are willing or going through the same challenges, we are more than happy to work. We cannot solve this problem in a singular siloed world. I think many organizations will go through this challenge in one way or the other. I think Suman's talk where he said, right, the trace data is not readable, you need to put SQL. I think many of us are thinking probably on the same lines. Just the tooling was different, right? So I think these are common problems, and anybody who's willing to work, please feel free to reach out. And our largest learnings, right? Was it worth building one such? Well, okay, so we don't know. We are yet to find the answers when we do that. The cloud costs aren't cheap. AWS sucks blood, to say the very least, right? So you're charged on intra-EC cost, you're charged on cross VPC cost, you're charged on EBS cost, you're charged on S3 cost. People who believe that S3 is cheap, come talk to us. We'll tell you how expensive S3 can get, especially if you're using S3 for remote storage. Right? To give you a number, somewhere last year, we ended up spending just on S3. We ended up spending close to around $12,000 a month, right? Right. So scalability is not easy. As I say, distributed systems are the hardest to fail. Lots of failures, right? So I want to scale up my sample rate. I have to scale up Kafka. I have to scale up Cassandra. I have to scale up the number of these processing pods. Whole lot of the challenges, right? It's not very easy to sort of scale these systems. So which basically means that how do you sort of measure only what matters? Don't throw in everything hoping that someday it'll become measurable. No, it will not become measurable. If you don't plan for what matters, it's not going to be measurable in time. Magically, it's not going to be measurable in time. It's not an analytics platform. Observability is not. Unfortunately, yes, you can build analytics tools, but it's not an analytics platform. You're only going to need this on that bad rainy day, like I said, right? So only measure what matters, and that is unfortunately not science. It's art, and it's a domain art. What I mean by domain art is that you or I as an engineer will know that for my system, what are the most important parameters that I want to measure, right? Nobody else can give that information, right? Again, this is also something that is spoken about in the last talk on this talk. How do you sort of standardize tags? What we have done is that we are enforcing that there is a standard OpenTelemetry format with a bunch of things. We said only stick to that and then build on it. And what I mean by build on it is add domain specific elements like my payment ID, my merchant ID. Payment ID is well bad. I would ideally say merchant ID and gateway ID or something like that. Enforce all of these things through a schema registry and enforce it via code. Your biggest hurdle is going to be, how do you do operational enforcement, especially if you're a reasonably large organization. Doing operational enforcement is going to be the toughest challenge, right? How do we make this useful for non-engineering folks? Like I said, right, the Jaeger UI is clunky. SQL is not something that my support person or ops person is going to natively know, right? So I would need to use a combination of a decent UI along with power tools like SQL. I would ideally want to sort of solve this problem for non-engineering folks as well, because at the end of the day, engineering should probably be the last line of support when it comes to this. Can I, for example, if I'm building this, or if you're building this, can we, for example, make sure that non-engineering can reasonably solve the problem and identify and route the identification to the engineering team, rather than the engineering team getting involved in identification? Can my support structure actually do the identification and route it to the engineering team? And the last question is, did we meet our objective? Right? We met some of our objectives, and like I said, we cannot meet all our objectives in a span of 1 or 2 quarters. The path is on, the journey is on, the learnings are on, the mistakes, well, yes, we have done, and there's no rightful way to not have done mistakes. I'm not going to shy away in saying that everything was perfect. Yes, there are a lot of mistakes. We still continue to make mistakes, and I think we should continue to make mistakes because there is no other way to unfortunately to learn in this world, right? With that, yes, okay, cheap branding, marketing, we are growing, hiring. Those are interested, please join. Okay, that's pretty much about it.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks, Venkat. That was a really insightful talk. And I think that answers a lot of questions from our audience on what are sort of like growing pains of an organization as it goes from a small startup to mid stage and then really, really large stage, and how basically the whole thing works, right?
Yep.
Yeah.